the Huntington welcomes you to our Director's Talk event for Witch, hosted by Assistant Director Rosalind Bevan, in conversation with Director Rebecca Bradshaw. This talk is part of a series of digital events for the Huntington's production of Witch by Jen Silverman, running live and in person through November 14th, 2021, and as a digital streaming production through November 28th. To learn about future talks, visit huntingtontheater.org/events. All events at the Huntington include a land acknowledgement. The Huntington acknowledges that our physical spaces stand on the occupied homeland of the Massachusetts people. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the Massachusetts tribe, from whom the colony, province, and Commonwealth of Massachusetts have taken their name. We'd like to pay respect to the ancestral bloodline of the Massachusetts tribe and their descendants who still inhabit the land to this day. We honor and respect the many Native peoples who are connected to this land, past, present, and future, including the Nipmuc and Wampanoag peoples. And now, the Director's Talk.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hey.
How are you today?
I am good. I'll be drinking my coffee during this.
Please do. Yeah, we're one day away from opening, and it's a crazy time. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But let's dive in. Let's talk about Witch.
Let's do it.
I know you've been sitting with this play for a long time, before the pandemic. And I wanted to just ask you, like, when you first read it or when you were starting to read it, like, what was the first moment where you were like, I have to direct this play?
Yeah, I read this about 2 years ago, and when it clicked, when this happens to a lot of plays with me, like I'll be reading a scene or a part of the play, and my adrenaline will start rushing and my heart will beat faster, and it would just be a moment of like, I can see it and I can feel it, and I'm like, sometimes when I read the script for the first time, I'll note next to words being like, yes, or like, ha ha ha, or something when I've actually laughed, or when I'm actually directing it down the road and I'm missing the laugh, I can go back to that draft and be like, you laughed here the first time you read this, bring that laugh back. But anyway, I think it was the first time when I was reading some of the scenes, and I had those conversations before. Like, I had been that woman in that room who wanted to interject, knew what was happening, and felt I didn't have the place to, or I wasn't accepted to be able to speak up, or I was actively strategizing how to use my one or two times to speak up. And I feel like that's something I am constantly grappling with as a woman in the workplace, and also now that I have in this position, I'm the head of the room, and now I'm all of a sudden, I don't have to apologize for my voice. I can be very vocal. I can be I'm leading it. So it's that transition from being somebody who has been more in a support role to being in a leadership role. I've been grappling with like just how I communicate. And when I'm seeing these scenes, I hear a previous self I hear my previous self in those scenes. And I felt that was super relatable. And I just knew I had to do the play. I want us to, as I was reading more and more, I found myself wanting to listen to people like Elizabeth and wanting to be a person like Elizabeth, where, society may have cast her aside, but she is unbelievably unapologetic. She questions everything because she has nothing to lose, because she's lost everything. So in that moment of being able to question everything, you actually make others think about why we do the things we do. And it changes the world. And like this play, she's changing the world. And it's just through something, she's not going out and protesting. She's just asking why we do the things we do, which I think is a very like quiet power, which is something when I read this play, I'm like, oh, I got to do that more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And so now that it's like on stage, crafted, are there still things about it that surprise you and that are like unexpectedly still hit you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you bring you bring a new collaborator, whether it's a designer in the room, an assistant director, a bunch of actors in a room, and all of a sudden your vision is distributed amongst so many people. So at that point, it's like just gathering all of there's a beautiful quote about you being a good leader is gathering all the brilliance in the room, and that's like my job. I think with this play is like everyone comes with a different point of view towards this play, and my goal is bringing the best ideas forward. So I don't know, we're watching a scene and like you just see like Javier, who plays Frank, or Barzin, who plays Sir Arthur, do something really funny, or just have fun with a certain line, which we thought wasn't very funny, or just kind of move the plot along. And all of a sudden there's a new bit of humor. I think humor kind of pops up in different ways in this show.
Totally.
Like when you read it, you feel the beats. But when I remember the first read with Nick Silfaro, who plays Cuddy, and all of a sudden every line could be funny.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, we have to make sure not every line is funny, so the funniest lines get the biggest laughs. So it was a funny conversation about like, how do we craft the laughs, because he was so good at finding the humor in every line, which is such a gift. It's easier to pull someone back than it is to ask them to be funny, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And they still surprise us every
Right.
time we watch it. It's so fun. Um, so let's talk about this world that we're in, which is like this Jacobean era, this really modern, contemporary language and relationships and dynamics, like you're talking about, and then this layer of the devil incarnate, kind of like Faustian situation, that's not really rooted in reality, but rooted in something that, like a story that we all really understand in like the canon of the world. And how did you start visualizing that? And then how did you start crafting that together with designers and the cast too?
Yeah, I remember a distinct conversation with the scenic designer, Luciana. We were in a conversation, and my vision of the world, like, because, you know, I've spent 14 years in Massachusetts. I grew up in New England. My depiction of witches and that era is it comes from like Arthur Miller's The Crucible. Like it comes
Right.
from these worlds where people were terrified. They were in the middle of woods, and people were terrified of like their surroundings, as well as women asking questions to the church. So it became so that's where my perspective on witchcraft and like and Salem witch trials and things like that. And I remember coming to the conversation, I was like, well, we need dirt floors. Like it's dirt. Like that's what everything is, dirt. And I remember Luciana being like, it was the 1600s, but they had like marble and tile and they had wood. And I was just like, of course they did. So it was this moment of like, even though it was a similar time period, it was a completely different part of the world. So my perspective on witches and the history of witches changed, but the core story was still there. It was a woman asking questions, or a woman just speaking out, or speaking her mind and then being cast aside. So I think that was a fun moment, being like, oh right, it's not a dirt floor. And I was just like, and those moments that you just like, you have this like, that's why you get people like dramaturgs and designers who come to the table with more imagery, and then you're like, oh, that's more accurate to what we're doing than what I had in my brain, because I had more of like the visual storytelling or the imagery, and not necessarily the factual what was happening. So I think our conversations, especially, and also with Chelsea Curl, our costume designer, was about how do we how do we make these people still feel like people to a modern audience? I mean, the silhouette of that time is really goofy. Like the men's waistline is really high, like almost right under the chest. And then the poofy pants, and like the more room you took up physically with your clothing, like denoted how much power you had. So I remember that time of like seeing this imagery, and I'm like, people are going to just laugh at these people when they walk on stage, and you're going to see a caricature of this person to a modern audience versus a real person underneath it that we want to listen to and understand. So we had this nice dance between Chelsea and I about like, let's look at what the actual like costuming it or actual clothing was of the Jacobean era, and then let's make it a little bit more modern, or just change the silhouette just slightly, so we're not laughing at how ridiculous they look. We're actually meeting them as people first.
Right.
And one of the fun costumes was Scratch, who is the devil and is someone who's kind of omnipresent, who can show up wherever and is a time traveler and shows up in whatever era. And that was a really fun costume because it's the only character in the play that actually wears a costume. Like he actually puts on something to fit into this world. So we went more modern with the fabric. He's in all leather, and this idea of like, we were calling him kind of a Jacobean James Dean, and like like this cool guy that as soon as he walks on, we just have to feel this cool like energy from him. But how do you do that in a Jacobean era where everyone has really weird puffy pants and things that just we don't see as cool? So we did a lot with fabric choice and silhouette, and also just like he felt very sleek compared to all the rest of the characters.
Totally. And we have these like entry points of meeting them in that way, where they still feel like real people. They still feel, they have their desires and their wants and needs, and it doesn't feel so far away visually and like with the language, obviously. But
right. And exactly. The language just lets you hear, we've talked about this. We're like, oh, we've heard that before. Or like we're in rehearsal and we're like, we hear something and I was like, that's in the text. Like that feels like it came from, us walking down the street or whatever. And I love that. Because it feels like the other part is like, we've talked about this a lot, is like, how do you snap people back into reality or modern day reality with a play that feels visually very distant? And that's why we started incorporating punk rock music into it for those transitions, because we just really wanted I really wanted for folks to see a scene and then be like, that feels very close, and then hear the music that feels very right now to be like, oh, it is closer, like snap you back to reality. And it's actually today. These are conversations that are happening today. It's just through the story of a different era.
I love it. I'm thinking about moments where I'm like, yep, absolutely. And like the burning of it all down feels so possible in this 1600s world. And like there's that distance that makes it able to imagine almost.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And specifically about that, it's like, it's really hard to bring up that concept now, right? Even though we are in a time period rife with, opportunity, as the devil says in the very last moment, right? We're all like, our entire world has been shook in the last year and a half. Everybody has been affected by what's happening with the pandemic and the social uprising that's been happening in this country. And being able to step back and be like, maybe we need to change the whole system. Maybe we need to try something completely new is terrifying, but people are talking about it. And what a more, what a more timely conversation right now where like all of us were questioning what we wanted to do with our lives, when specifically you and I were in theater. It stopped.
Yep.
Like everything stopped. And we were like, why do we do this? Why have we put so much of our time and energy and finances into this field that is, you know, we all question, like maybe like I said this in the interview in the program, but like I was looking at a full different field in social work during this time period, just because theater left my life for a couple months, and it got really hard because I didn't have that outlet. So anyways, this play kind of like, if you step back and you have that opportunity to question how these systems are built, maybe we don't keep building them. Maybe we actually chop them down, burn them down, and start new with new ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a
Terrifying.
powerful, it's terrifying, and it's such a powerful idea that's brought up in the play,
Yeah.
and it hits you really hard and fast, and it's, yeah, it's really impactful when she brings up that idea.
Yeah.
Kind of going off of that a little bit, just because it's, you know, Elizabeth that brings up this idea, and where she sits in this world, and there are so many themes of womanhood in this play, and gender dynamics, and also queerness and sexuality. And I wanted to ask you just about crafting these moments throughout with Frank and Cuddy, and also with Scratch and Elizabeth, and what that was like for you. I mean, we were together in the room, but can we talk a little bit about what that's like, crafting these moments where, yeah, the lines are blurry or the lines are really clear, and like what that means to you in this play too?
Yeah. Well, I think the exciting part about this play, it's a queer story. There's a lot of queerness in it, but it's not a coming out story. Like, it's not this moment of identity being you know, someone putting their soul on the table because of their sexual identity, which I was so intrigued by, because I think a lot of stories I read right now are in that impetus of someone coming out. It's so it's the most challenging moment for anybody who's queer or anybody who's LGBTQ plus. And I, as being a queer woman, I was very fortunate. I you know, I still haven't come out to everybody, but I'm also like, it's part of my identity. It's not my whole identity. And the character of Cuddy is that's his reality. And his dad actually, yeah, he wants him to marry a woman, but there's also this undercurrent of like, he can just be him. Like, there is this acceptance of whatever identity he has, but really his father's really after somebody who steps into the role with a very highly masculine energy. And that's so different. They get so conflated in you know, media and storytelling, but they're actually so different in this world. Whereas like, there's a moment that we were crafting between Frank and Cuddy, one of the final moments, and this was actually Javier, who plays Frank, in his callback, he talked to me about like, when there's a moment of intimacy at the very end of the play where they almost kiss, or he touches, it's the moment when he touches his face, and then Frank says, "I can't." And it's not a rejection, it's an I can't, like it's almost like a ellipses. Like and Javier brought that up. He's like, he says, "I can't." He doesn't say, like, he doesn't push him away. He doesn't run away from that moment of queerness between these two characters. In actuality, if he were in a different world and he didn't have his situation of needing to marry a wife in order to continue the legacy, in order to become an heir, maybe there was an opportunity for them. It's actually the society around them that says it's wrong, but they aren't saying it's wrong. They're not running away from each other. They're actually just saying, "I can't right now."
Yeah.
Which I think is so it feels so realistic, and it feels just it just feels so right for these characters. And that moment, I love that moment, because it's someone trying to go into separate the sexual identity from his identity as someone who is taking over a legacy. I think and we crafted that with Sir Arthur too. Like, we don't think it's about, he wasn't right for Cuddy wasn't right for the throne because of his sexual identity. He wasn't right because he wasn't the picture perfect masculine masculine energy, and yes, that's all conflated in the identity, but it feels very different in this play.
Yeah. It's because of what they want that he says I can't, not because he's a man. It's like,
Yes.
I can't because I want to be heir and I want to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's not because he doesn't
feel
that way.
Yeah.
It's so fun. Like, it's really compelling.
Yeah.
Moment.
And it's also just like muddled. Like it can be so life is complicated. It's complex. People are complicated. And I think that's what's so hard with a lot of plays, is especially with LGBTQ plus characters, are kind of put into this, like, what we think the world sees people as. But in actuality, there's so much more complexities. You're not just playing the lesbian card or playing the gay card. Like, there's actually a whole human behind that identity. And the identity might just be secondary. So yeah. I think there was another part of that question.
That basically encapsulates it too. And I'm thinking a lot about that, what you just said, of like, people are complex and these aren't archetypes, and like every single one of these actors brought themselves to it and helped us craft these moments in this world. And I wish we had more time to talk about it.
Yes.
And I know you and I could talk. We have talked hours about this play. But thank you so much for sitting down with me and also sharing with our audience too. And I'll see you later today at rehearsal.
See you later.
Thank you,
Thanks
Rebecca.
so much.